Hello and good day. Welcome to the Inago Academy's webinar on citations, citation databases, and how to get indexed in international citation databases. My name is Richard de Grijs. I am a senior academic at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, and I'm also a publishing consultant for Inago. I'm happy to be your host today. The agenda shows that we'll first talk about scholarly collaboration and impact, then address why and what authors need to cite. That leads us naturally into the topic of citation indexing and its significance, and how that is encompassed in international citation databases. The final section of today's webinar is of interest both to researchers but also to journal editors and publishers. We'll try to give you a handle on how journals and publishers can be indexed in citation databases and hence improve their general visibility. So let's get started on scholarly collaboration and impact, an issue close to my heart as a researcher and hopefully to that of many of the attendees as well. This graph shows you the share of science and engineering articles internationally co-authored by region, country, or economy. The bar graphs show you the relevant percentages in 2006 and 2016, the latest data we have available. It turns out that almost 2/3 of global articles currently have authors from multiple institutions. In the period between 2006 and 2016, we saw a massive increase in worldwide publications produced with international collaboration. And by that, we mean with authors hailing from institutional addresses from at least 2 countries. The percentage-wise, it went up from 16.5% of international collaborations to 21.7% over that 10-year period. The graph here shows the trends in the proportions of research articles with international co-authors. You can see that the UK, France, and Germany all have very high levels of international co-authorship at around 50% of papers. And most major research producing nations have seen an increase in levels of international collaboration in recent years. The one exception in this plot is China, which has only seen modest growth, and India has recorded a small decline. This graph then splits up the different disciplines, again between 2006 and 2016. You can see that the growth in authorship, in international co-authorship has varied by discipline, with the largest numbers of co-authors in physics and astronomy, and the smallest co-authorship in the fields of mathematics and the social sciences on the right-hand side of your diagram. A more recent trend has been the increase in papers with more than 50 authors, and even with more than 1,000 authors, which we refer to as hyper-authorship, and that's driven largely by international high-energy and space physics collaboration. When I introduced myself, I didn't tell you that I'm actually an astrophysicist myself, so I've seen this in real life. It's quite impressive to see very large author lists, but that also raises the question as to what contribution each of these authors has provided to that particular paper, of course. The United Kingdom had the maximum international collaboration rate. Sorry, let me get to the next slide here. The United Kingdom had the maximum international collaboration rate of 57.1% among all top science and engineering publishing countries in 2016. However, the US is a particularly important partner for international collaboration. 39% of internationally collaborative papers include at least one US-based co-author. There is a clear benefit to researchers from international collaboration in terms of increased citations. We had a meeting at my university today where this was a topic of discussion, and over the last couple of years within my faculty of science and engineering, the number of papers with international co-authors had gone up by 10%, so that was quite good, because we're also interested in increasing our citation rates. The average number of citations received per article increases with each additional collaborating country. And in particular, developing countries observe a boost in citations resulting from international collaboration much more than developed countries, and that's probably because they benefit from collaborating with better established research teams in developed countries. Chinese papers with international collaboration, for instance, receive 2.5 times as many citations as those with no collaborators beyond the lead institution. So that's only domestic or even local. Science and engineering publications increasingly cite work of foreign authors and progressively receive citations from foreign authored publications. China's citation rate increased rapidly in the decade from 2004 until 2014. If we define the average impact as a measure the number of citations received relative to the number of science and engineering articles published and the fields in which they appear, the average impact of US publications was 42% higher in 2014 compared to the global average, again in terms of citations. The US as a partner seems very important, therefore. World citations to US publications increased from 47 to almost 56% over that decade. However, in 2014, the odds of US research publications to be amongst the top 1% cited articles were favored by the huge numbers of publications published in the United States. So there is a trend here, of course, that the more papers you publish, the more citations you get as well. This graph shows the share of citations to selected region, country, or economy that are received from authors overseas. This is from 1996 until 2014. I propose we look at the decade from 2004 until 2014. During that decade, the share of citations to US publications that came from abroad increased from 47 to 56%. The relative shares of foreign citations increased in most countries over that same period. China was a bit different. By contrast, its share of international share of citations decreased from 42% in 2004 to about 38% in 2014. However, the international share of a publication's use in citations tends to decrease as a country's domestic publication volume growth. Thus, changes in international citations for China were to be expected. China dramatically increased its output in recent years, so the associated decrease in its international share of citations supports this overall trend. The inverse relationship also holds because the US share of total world output has decreased and the international share of US citations has grown. So this is an offset between the US and China in terms of volume and citations. That leads us to the question, why and what authors need to cite? Well, first of all, a citation is a text reference and an acknowledgement of any documented information in another study, not in your own study, although you can, of course, refer within your own study, but then not use a citation in your bibliography. A citation illustrates the interconnectivity of scientific ideas between the existing literature and the current research as recognized by the authors that are publishing the relevant paper. A reference list corresponds to a complete list of citations, usually appearing at the end of the document, sometimes in footnotes. So have a look at those two papers schematically shown at the bottom of your screen. Paper R, which was published in April 2016, used a technique from paper C on the right-hand side, published in 1951, that actually describes that particular technique. That is why paper R includes a reference to paper C in its reference list or bibliography, while paper C received a citation from paper R. So this is the one-to-one connection between reference and citation. The reference is what you give, the citation is what you receive. Why should authors cite? Well, that should be fairly self-explanatory. It shows adherence to academic writing standards. It shows respect for and acknowledges the work of other scholars, while also avoiding plagiarism. It helps provide evidence in support of one's claims. It provides evidence that the authors have read and considered the relevant literature, so they know where their work is placed with respect to other papers in the literature. It gives credibility to one's work. helps others trace the source of one's work, and eventually facilitates literature surveys. And it's ethical to do because you want to give credit where credit is due, of course. So what should authors cite? Very importantly, any quotes by another person, direct or interpreted or paraphrased. If it's a direct quote or a directly copied bit of text from another paper, you can cite it by putting the quote in inverted commas and adding the reference. Very important, otherwise you might be accused of plagiarism if you don't do this. You should cite original research articles, books, websites, etc. If you cite a website, please include the date you last accessed the website. Websites tend to change more often than printed materials, of course. Statistics from another source, such as populations, results of surveys, etc. Tables, figures, diagrams, or images created by someone else. That's the key point here, that someone else created something and that's what you cite. Controversial facts, opinions, or dates from another source, and data used for meta-analysis. So that's your overarching analysis of multiple papers. That also leads directly to the notion of what one should not cite. Your own observations or experimental results, that's what you present, you don't cite them. You might cite a paper that you wrote earlier, and so that's a self-citation, but that's okay if your current paper is a direct follow-up of that previous paper. You don't cite your own experiences, for example, in a reflective journal. You don't cite your own thoughts, comments, or conclusions in an assignment, your own evaluation or analysis. So anything that you did yourself in that particular paper, you don't cite in the reference list. You can have some references within the paper or forward references or back references to what you said earlier, but you don't actually add a formal citation. You also don't have to cite common knowledge or folklore, and here the line is a bit blurry. It's not always very obvious what common knowledge is. If in doubt, I suggest you find a primary citation to the bit of information that you want to get across, and you cite it. If there is any doubt that what you might be using is not common knowledge. In terms of indexing, we care, or indices care about what we call citation counts. It's the frequency of an article cited by researchers in their articles. Counting citations is often called citation analysis. When you count the number of times an article has been cited in published research, you gain information about that article's impact on its discipline. If an article has a high number of citations, you may conclude that it has been the subject of discussion or criticism in its discipline. This is important to understand. A high number of citations doesn't necessarily mean that the paper is good. It could be heavily criticized. Critical citations, negative citations, also add to your citation count. Counting citations sounds simple, but citation analysis tools count citations from different sets of publications. A bit further down the line in this presentation, I'll show you the differences in citation counts based on different databases for a set of research papers, and you might be surprised to see how different the numbers are. When you're performing a citation analysis, you may wish to use several resources to count citations in order to fully capture an article's impact. So what could one cite? We could cite articles. That gives you a direct measure of the citation impact. You could cite authors or get an idea of an author's productivity by citing or looking at the number of their papers. That provides you with the quantity measure, the number of their citations, that's the quality of their work, the average number of citations per article, the H index, which provides a measure often referred to as quantity and quality, or something called the G index. Any of these numbers refer to individual authors. And then in terms of journals, you often hear about the so-called journal impact factor, or sometimes simply referred to as the impact factor. In this webinar today, we're only going to talk specifically about the H index and the journal impact factor in any detail. So let's move on to citation indexing. There are three principles underlying the idea of citation indexing, and they're shown here on the slide. First, all knowledge from whatever discipline is always dependent on or related to tenets already accepted and established. You don't do anything in a vacuum. There is context. Two, the core literature on a given subject is contained in only a selection of journals relevant to that subject, and identification of these core periodicals will save research time. So what are the most important journals in your area? And three, the product of research is knowledge, which is recorded and published. And one possible measure of its significance is the frequency of citation in subsequent research. So these are the core tenets of citation indexing. And that leads me to ask the question, what is a citation index? Well, a citation index is a bibliographic database that interrelates citations among publications. The first of the citation indices that we know today for papers published in academic journals was the Science Citation Index, developed in 1960 by a gentleman by the name Eugene Garfield at the Institute for Scientific Information. I think many of you are aware of the SCI database, and many institutions require their staff and students to publish in SCI listed papers. Journals, sorry. The SCI list index was subsequently expanded into other fields to produce the Social Sciences Citation Index and the Arts and Humanities Citation Index. The Institute for Scientific Information, ISI, covers virtually all disciplines, whereas before, in traditional indexing and abstracting services, they were often limited to a single field rather than all fields. So let's have a look at this Science Citation Index, SCI. It's currently owned, it's commercial. It's currently owned and maintained by a company called Clarivate Analytics since the last 2 or 3 years. It is the leading citation index in science and technology, but perhaps shockingly, about 20 years ago, in 1997, it was estimated to cover only 2.5% of the world's scientific journals, only the cream of the cream. The Science Citation Index expanded, SCIE, presently comprises more than 8,500 significant journals spread across 150 disciplines. The index, the SCIE, is made available online through different platforms such as the Web of Science, Scopus, and SciSearch, and you may have heard of some or all of these. So SCI is a subset of SCIE, and SCIE is essentially the web version of what a decade or two ago used to be a database available only on CD-ROM or a floppy disk. So what can we use as sources of citation indices? The availability of journals through abstracting and indexing services is often seen as an indication of a journal's credibility. Citations of relevant articles can be searched and obtained from these services. And here are some popular indexing services, and I'm sure you've heard of at least some of them: PubMed, Crossref, Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholar. I'd like to add a note of caution to Google Scholar because it is not as rigorous in terms of its inclusion of peer-reviewed literature as some of the other indices. So be a bit circumspect and a bit careful if you rely on Google Scholar. Some countries or regions also have their own indexing services. For instance, the Russian Science Citation Index, and there are indices for Korea and some other countries as well. Now, I promised I was going to show you how citation indices differ. So have a look at this graph here. At the bottom left, on the bottom left-hand side here, it says that the numbers you see are the average citations obtained over the course of a year based on 33 articles in stem cell research published in Springer and Biomed Central journals. And you see that these numbers differ quite significantly from 19.3 citations on average to 81.4 depending on your database. And you see that Google Scholar provides by far the largest average number of citations. That's because Google Scholar indexes pretty much everything on the web, while some of the other databases are a bit more selective in what they include in their data. So why do we care about citation indexing? What is the significance of it? Well, you can wonder, what would you do if you have to find material on some research topic? You can look through books, articles, papers you already know of, or perhaps found by searching on the web to find references, citations, right, made by the authors to other works. We assume that these will be related to the relevant document's content. The problem with doing it this way, with this strategy, is that they are only going to point to research literature that's older than the papers that you use to get the research literature from. And this is where citation indexing helps. In a citation index, a cited paper will point to any literature, and that's books, journals, proceedings, that depends on your discipline, that has cited it. So it is a forward reference. It doesn't only refer to older papers, it actually refers to more recent papers, more recently published papers. The paper's influence and reach can be assessed by linking to all papers that have cited it. This way, current trends and emerging fields can also be rated. We can also search citation databases by topic, author, source title, and address. This is therefore a great way of obtaining an assessment of the impact of an article, an author, or a journal. And that's why we have all these metrics. And one of the most important metrics in use in academia is the journal impact factor. I'm sure many of you have heard of this, journal JIF, journal impact factor, or simply the impact factor. It counts the number of citations to a journal in the previous 2 years divided by the number of articles published in those years. So the 2019 journal impact factor will count the number of citations to a given journal in 2017 and 2018 divided by the number of articles published in those years. It therefore reflects the average number of citations to recent articles published in the journal. To give you an example, one of the top journals in science and engineering is Nature, and I just looked it up. The Nature impact factor for last year was 41.577. So that's a very high value. In my field of astrophysics, most of the common good journals have impact factors between about 5 and 6. In some other fields, like in computing, good journals have impact factors around 1. So the impact factor is not a universal measure. It depends on your subdiscipline. And that's very important to keep in mind, particularly because the impact factor is frequently used for the relative importance of a journal within its field. Whether or not this makes sense is an issue of contention, because it could be gamed to some extent. The journal impact factor could be driven by only a small number of very highly cited articles, for instance. And I'll show you a few other examples of how some unscrupulous journals or editors may try to game the journal impact factor in a little while. The other measure that is often used in academia is the so-called H index, which refers to individual authors, scientists. It measures both the productivity and impact of a scientist's published work. It's based on the scientist's most cited papers and the number of citations that he or she has received in other publications. It reflects both the number of publications and the number of citations per publication. Now, to give you an idea, my own my own H index is currently 44, which means that 44 of my articles have attracted at least 44 citations. In order to increase my own H index by 1, all of those 44 plus the 45th paper need to have attracted at least 45 citations, etc. Some of the top scientists in my field have H indices of in the 90s or even more, but you know, this is that depends on your productivity. The H index can also be applied to gauge productivity and impact of a group of scientists, such as departments, universities, or research institutes, although it is less frequently applied to more than a single scientist. So based on all of this, you might wonder why journals index in citation index databases. The authors, journals, and institutes who publish their papers are increasingly assessed by their citation rates. The journal impact factor and the H index are often used as a measure of scientific importance, and research funds are often largely dependent on these values. To give you an example, a couple of years ago when I applied for a more senior job, I was given to understand by the selection panel, they invited me for interview, that they only looked at people who had a minimum age index. They did not even consider anyone below their cutoff value. So it is important to keep this in mind. Citation databases are therefore instrumental in evaluation and funding of research. It is therefore important for journals to be indexed in a reliable citation database with wide visibility. Well, that clearly begs the question, what are citation databases? What can we use? Perhaps best known is the ISI Web of Knowledge, a dynamic, integrated, online subscription-based scientific citation indexing service. So it's not something you can just go to, but your institution needs to subscribe to its data sets. The Web of Knowledge encompasses more than 50,000 scholarly books, 12,000 journals, and 160,000 conference proceedings across many disciplines. Provides access to 6 online databases, some of which we've already heard about. The SCIE, the Science Citation Index Expanded, 8,500 journals. The Social Sciences Citation Index, more than 3,000 journals. Arts and Humanities Citation Index, more than 1,700 journals. And then a few we haven't discussed yet, the Emergent Sources Citation Index, in the Sciences, Social Sciences and Humanities, more than 5,000 journals. The Book Citation Index, more than 60,000 books since 2005, and the Conference Proceeding Citation Index, as I mentioned, more than 160,000 conference titles in the sciences mostly. There are indeed also regional citation indices covered by the Web of Science, and they include the Chinese Science Citation Database, Cielo. It's open access journal content from Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries, Latin America, the Caribbean, Spain, Portugal, and South Africa. The Korean Journal Database, KCI, the Science Citation Index Expanded. These databases have staff working for them. They are updated weekly, and previous year's indices are available at many academic libraries, mostly in print. So how do you get into the Web of Science? Well, you need to meet minimum requirements in terms of, for instance, publishing standards. What are the timelines of your journal? Do you issue journals? Do you release journals routinely and timely? Do you meet international conventions, editorial conventions? Are the article titles fully descriptive with complete cited references and author addresses? Is the full text in English, or either full text or at least bibliographic information? And English is perhaps unfortunately the key language that's indexed here, because it's the universal language of science. For this reason, Clarivate Analytics focuses on journals that publish full text in English, or at the very least bibliographic information in English. This is particularly true in the natural sciences. And also in terms of publishing standards, your articles need to be peer reviewed. And secondly, editorial contents. Editors are proficient in sorry, let me back that up. You can be indexed in the Web of Science if you can show that your editors are proficient in recognizing emerging topics and active fields in the literature. Web of Science editors ask themselves, do we need this journal in the database, or is the category already well covered? And how does this journal compare with the journals we already cover of similar scope? So does your journal stand out? Is it something that's a real novel contribution, or is it more of the same? International diversity. Are the authors, editors, and editorial advisory board members employed at institutions around the world? Does this journal reflect the global context in which science takes place, in which research takes place? Regional journals are also included in the Web of Science, a small fraction of them. Of course, here international diversity is less important. But still, the Web of Science editorial team asks whether the journal targets an international or a regional audience. And so it is important to be clear about this if you run a journal. In the Web of Science, the citation analysis for new journals provides citations to authors and editors' prior work for a established journals, it provides the impact factor and other citation data. Every year, about 2,000 journals are evaluated by Web of Science staff, but only 10 to 12% of journals, 150 to 200, are selected for inclusion. 85% of journals have self-citation rates lower than 15%. Having a low self-citation rate means that most of your citations are to journals other than your own journal, and therefore you're part of the larger ecosystem of research and not just a standalone journal working in your own little niche. New journals are judged based on their contributors, what is their quality, what is their standing. Established journals are often re-evaluated by journal impact factor, total citations, etc. Let's move on to Scopus. I'm sure you've heard of Scopus as well. It's a very popular citation database. It's the world's largest abstract and citation database of peer-reviewed research literature. It's continuously expanded and revised and covers different source types to ensure coverage, discoverability, profiles, and impact measurement of research in all subject fields. Scopus includes more than 150,000 books, almost 22,000 journals, over 8 million conference proceedings, and other types of publications. It includes over 69 million records, with the oldest record dating back to 1788, probably in the natural sciences. It also comprises more than 39 million patent records. So how do you get into Scopus? Again, it depends on what standards you meet. Does your journal publish regularly? Does it provide abstracts in English? Is it peer-reviewed? Are the references legible to someone who doesn't read a non-Roman language? And do you provide a clear publication ethics statement? A journal is supposed to meet at least these minimum conditions to be indexed in Scopus. Scopus requires that every journal indexed must publish a clear and consistent statement of publication ethics and malpractice policies dealing with plagiarism, fraud, conflict of interest, etc. All journals that are submitted for evaluation should meet the following primary criteria for review. All content must be peer-reviewed. Issues should be published on a regular basis. The journal should have an ISSN number registered with the International ISSN Center. Content should be relevant and readable for an international audience with clear language, graphic design, and layout. The journal should have a publication ethics and publication malpractice statements, as we mentioned on the previous slide. The criteria that will be used in the review process are grouped in 5 main categories. And you see that here on the slide. Journal policy, content, citations, regularity, and online availability. Subject matter experts working for Scopus deal with content selection, and the advisory board then reviews titles using both quantitative and qualitative measures, and the selection is partly based on sample documents from the relevant journal. And of course, those journals get re-evaluated fairly regularly. And here are some of the criteria, the metrics that the evaluators look at. And particularly, they look at the extent of self-citation, the citation, the scope of citations, the impact per publication, article output, abstract usage, and whether there are links to the full text. On this slide, you can see the number of titles reviewed by Scopus team members, and the number of titles reviewed is shown on the left-hand y-axis, where you can see that as a function of month here between January 2011 and March 2014, every month between 50 and maybe 200 journals were evaluated, and about, in this particular case, between 30 and 50 or 60% were eventually accepted into Scopus. So how does Scopus compare with the Web of Science? Well, you can see that fairly well here. Scopus is much more encompassing than the Web of Science in all fields. At the top, you see a direct comparison of Scopus versus the Web of Science. At the bottom, the four colored ellipses show you the same information for four different disciplines: physical sciences, health sciences, life sciences, and social sciences. And in all cases, Scopus is much more diverse and encompasses many more titles than the Web of Science. But it is also clear that both Scopus and the Web of Science are very heavily biased towards journals published in Western Europe and North America, and very few from elsewhere in the world. Part of that might be a language issue, part of that might be a quality issue, and part of it might simply be because the other journals are perhaps more regional and the international community is more focused on English language journals from Western countries, which might be an unfortunate situation, but at the moment that's where we are. Moving on to Crossref, which we've heard about already in this webinar, is a non-profit membership organization which registered DOIs. DOIs are digital object identifiers. These are what we call persistent identifiers. So once you get a DOI, throughout the life of your paper, you can always find the location of the paper online by following the digital object identifier. Crossref has more than 10,000 members from more than 100 countries. It helps authors follow links to DOIs from reference lists and locate sources from a member's publishing platform. So this makes things easier for people to find the relevant literature by simply following those DOIs. Crossref also provides services like plagiarism checking and searches for funding agencies. You have to pay for that. It's a subscription-based service. Its tools and services allow authors to identify, cite, link, and verify publications. And Crossref also maintains a funder registry called Fundref, a unique list of grant-providing agencies and organizations. If you're interested in this, and I guess most researchers on the webinar might be interested in this, see if your institution provides access to this. Here you can see what kind of content Crossref provides. On the left, you see that the majority are journal articles, almost 3/4 are journal articles, and then a whole slew of other types, including books, that's the yellow band, and some smaller fractions of other types of output. On the right-hand side, you see which countries were new members in 2018 and which contributed most, with Indonesia leading the pack here, Russia, the Russian Federation, South Korea, Turkey, etc., providing new members in decreasing order. To be a member of Crossref, journals are required to share bibliographic metadata as well as funding data, reference lists, abstracts, and ORCIDs, and similar information. ORCID is the Open Researcher and Contributor ID, which gives a unique persistent identifier to a given individual researcher. It is free to sign up, takes a few minutes only at www.orchid.org, and you will have an identifier for life, which makes it easier to get credit for everything you produce over the course of your professional career. The sharing has to be on a regular basis and tracked by including persistent identifiers like DOIs, ORCIDs, etc. The XML file, the kind of the source code, the upload of XML is critical for ensuring that the published links are actually working. So this is a quality check. So the basic steps of registering your content if you are a journal publisher are shown here. You get those identifiers, you create a registration XML file, you upload it, you verify it, and you make sure that you maintain your records. Regarding the DOIs, Crossref has clear guidelines for its display, for its members. DOIs need to be displayed in tables of contents, in abstracts within HTML or PDF articles, while downloading citations to reference management systems, in instructions on how to cite this on content pages, whenever directing users to a permanent, stable, or persistent link, and in social network links. So DOIs are important because way you can actually follow wherever the source of your reference of your citation is based. Now, citation indexing sounds good and is often used by um, funders, by academic institutions to see what the impact of a researcher or a research team is. But unfortunately, like everything, there are some flaws in the system, and it often can be gamed as well. Journal rankings can be manipulated by including more self-citations. Journals publish more review articles, so review articles tend to attract more citations, and that is also a way to increase your citations. Some journals encourage citations from the same journal, and if you suddenly speed up the publication cycle, you also increase your impact factor. If you follow the very popular blog Retraction Watch, retractionwatch.com, you will often see journals or people, editors, called out for manipulation of journal rankings. So it's a good overview of what you should not do as a journal publisher or editor. A very important flaw of citation indexing is the so-called Matthew effect, and this refers to a biblical situation where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's a social phenomenon often linked to the idea that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This effect of accumulated advantage can be observed in many aspects of life and fields of activity, including academic publishing. The journal impact factor has an acute effect on the citation rates of otherwise identical papers. Scientists usually look up the impact factors of journals in order to choose where to publish. They also tend to read journals with high impact factors in their own field, and thus the papers in these journals become more visible and more highly cited. So this is self-perpetuating. High rankings retain high rankings and become perhaps even more highly ranked. That's because the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's therefore very hard for new journals to break into high rankings. This also leads to a bias for Anglo-American journals, again a language issue here, and non-English language citations are undercounted. So if you're a publisher or if you're running a journal, what can you do about this and how can you break into this system? Well, first of all, make sure that your journal or journals are of high quality. It's often very easy for experienced scientists like myself to flag poor journals. For instance, all editors and authors are at the same institution. That's not international, that's not breadth and diversity. Plagiarism speaks for itself. Poor figures, poor grammar. Use an English language agency or use editors who know how to edit papers in the language of your journal. Flawed science, that means peer review was not done properly. Varying quality, poor homepage, lack of journal focus. These things are very easy to deal with, but poor journals just simply don't deal with them, and they can be easily identified. So how can journals get indexed? You can use a journal hosting system, and there are some logos shown on the right-hand side of the page. Hosting systems assist in publication of scholarly content, like journals, articles, or books. These systems help editors have real-time interactions with authors and peer reviewers. Use DOIs, ORCIDs, Crossref, ISBNs, persistent identifiers, so you can always get back to the source of your document. All of that helps with getting indexed in the databases. Use aggregators like JSTOR, Cielo, we mentioned Cielo earlier, Redalyc. They offer free access to scholarly material and act as digital libraries. They also act as bibliographic databases. Now, if you have been running a journal and you want to improve the quality, here are some suggestions. Many good quality journals ensure that the articles that are not readable at the time of submission are rejected. This is important to ensure that appropriate information is communicated to the journal's readers. For papers written in English, some papers submitted by authors who are not native English speakers can be difficult to read, which is why these papers may require intervention at the editorial level, either by the journal's editors or through other service providers, English language editing companies, for instance. Also, as a journal, the improvement in quality parameters is directly proportional to the quality of papers that are published on a regular basis. For this purpose, adherence to research and publication ethics, as well as meeting the expectations of the journal's target audience, are essential. So here, that what I just said, it was summarized here on the page. Target audience, high quality of language. Make sure that your journal looks good in terms of language. The importance and relevance of peer review probably doesn't need much emphasis here because we're talking to researchers. There are certain critical aspects of peer review which can help improve the quality of your publication, however, as well as the impact of the journal quality. Although a simple requirement, establishing peer review guidelines can definitely help peer reviewers provide inputs where required and not miss out on the important aspects that the journal expects them to examine in any submitted manuscript. Tell your peer reviewers what they're supposed to be looking for. Given the complexity of the publication process, it is important that journals provide timelines to their peer reviewers for both initial submissions and revised submissions. I used to edit for one of the main journals in my field. We gave our peer reviewers 3 to 4 weeks to come back with an initial report and 2 to 3 weeks for a revised paper. That's just an example, but we were clear in what we expected in terms of the timeline from our peer reviewers. Any acceptance or rejection decision should be influenced by the peer reviewer's opinions. It's not just the editor who decides, but the editor should take on board the professional judgment from the peer reviewers he or she has solicited. It is important for journals to ensure that there is no conflict of interest in the paper getting reviewed by a particular peer reviewer. Ask your potential reviewers if there is a conflict of interest. Do your own due diligence and make sure that the peer reviewers have not recently published with the authors or been their PhD advisor, for instance. And that happens, unfortunately. For the process to be effective, it is important that all the data of a submission are made available by both the author and the journal to the reviewers. And here is a list that summarizes, in essence, what to look for in the peer review process. A journal's editors are the face of the journal to everyone. That is the author, the peer reviewer, and also the potential reader. Also, in a well-managed journal, all communication related to any of the journal's past, previous, or future publications should be routed to the journal's editors. Along with the editor-in-chief, it is the journal's editors who are expected to uphold ethical practices of publication and implement the journal's policies and practices. Importantly, the journal's editors help identify acquired data or clarification from authors for any suspicious submissions or unclear content. The fairness and consistency in the decision-making process for publications is also driven by the journal's editors. And here are a list of do's and don'ts that editors should comply with. It's about transparency with reviewers and authors, clear guidelines, maintain confidentiality, avoid conflict of interests, and make sure that your papers meet the aims and scope. And then the don'ts, make sure that there is no biased peer review, no unethical practices, no conflict of interest, and don't benefit from confidential or privileged information for your own gain. There are a number of organizations out there, including the Committee of Publication Ethics, COPE, some of the others mentioned here, the Directory of Open Access Journal, DOAJ. They collaborated to identify possible membership criteria for evaluating membership applications from journals and publishers. And here are just a few of the proposed criteria used for evaluating. The website of your journal, the journal's name, the editorial board and peer review process, information on copyright and licensing, how one deals with research misconduct, publication ethics, publishing schedule, access, archiving. The issue here is all of this needs to be clear, needs to be very transparent what's happening, clear guidelines, and everything should be above board and professional. So that leads me to two sets of summaries. I have one set of summaries for journal editors. The takeaway points are the following. Make sure your peer review system is up to date. Support initiatives designed to reduce academic misconduct. Support initiatives to educate researchers about publication ethics. Publish clear instructions about paper submission and what you expect from authors. Have systems in place to detect falsified and fraudulent data. Identify photographic images or plagiarized text, either routinely or when suspicions are raised. And this photographic images issue seems to be a particular issue of contention in the biological sciences, as far as I can tell. Finally, for publishers, make sure you follow ethical practices. Establish and maintain a proper and complete journal website, possibly including an English version if your journal is not in English. Make your content discoverable digitally online. Use DOIs, digital object identifiers. Make it readable with English abstracts, references, possibly the full paper. Work with international organizations, including Crossref and possibly the DOAJ if you are an open access journal. And promote published papers and possibly use hosting services and aggregators. That leads us to the end of the roughly 50 minutes I had to share this presentation with you. I would like to thank you for your attention. It's been a pleasure being here with you, and I hope it was helpful for you. Thank you very much, and have a good morning, afternoon, or night, wherever you may be.